Have you ever heard of Satan's messenger? Before and after his sentencing, everyone in that courtroom knew one thing for sure. This man wasn't just some criminal. He was something else entirely. A servant. A messenger of the devil. He was fully conscious, fully aware, when he shouted during sentencing, "Hail Satan! See you in Disneyland." Today, I'm going to tell you the story of the Night Stalker. A criminal who came out of the grave, lived as a loyal servant of Satan, and killed not out of necessity, but because he loved to kill. He lived for the moment he saw pure terror in his victims' eyes, right before their souls left their bodies. Now get this. Even after he was arrested and sentenced to death, this guy got married twice while in prison. And when he died, it wasn't in a bloody shootout or a dramatic escape. He passed away quietly, on a white hospital bed. His last words? "Hail Satan, I'll be back, and I'll kill more and more people." Let's rewind to July 12th, 1982, in the state of Texas. A young woman named Jennifer, 21 years old, had just gotten home around 8 p.m. after a long day at work. She started looking for her little sister, Whitney, a 9-year-old girl, but couldn't find her. Jennifer called the babysitter, who told her Whitney was asleep in her room when she left at 7 p.m. Something didn't feel right. Jennifer started searching the house, and eventually, she went down to the basement, a place she never thought to check. And that's where she found her. Whitney, hanging from the ceiling. Jennifer screamed at the top of her lungs and ran into the street calling for help. Neighbors rushed over and followed her to the basement, and what they saw would haunt them forever. The child was disfigured, tortured. But what Jennifer hadn't even noticed in the shock was that her sister's hands had been cut off and placed under her body, crossed. Police arrived quickly and started an investigation. They discovered the killer had entered through an open window and spent over an hour inside, torturing the little girl. After she passed out, he hanged her from a rope tied to the ceiling. Then, under her body, he drew a circle of blood with a 5-pointed star inside it, and placed her severed hands crossed over the symbol. 3 months went by. The investigation hit a dead end. No clues, no leads, no answers. The case was closed, unsolved. What no one knew was that the killer was Richard Ramirez. Richard was born on February 29, 1960, in El Paso, Texas. He had a brutal, twisted childhood, one that may have paved the way for the monster he became. Some believe Richard turned into a killer because of severe head injuries he suffered as a child. His parents were undocumented immigrants from Mexico. They had 7 kids, lived in poverty, and faced a ton of discrimination. His father, frustrated and angry, would take it out on his children, and Richard got the worst of it. But here's the thing. That story mostly comes from Richard himself after he was arrested. And a lot of times, killers use childhood trauma to justify what they've done, to paint themselves as victims. Criminal behavior experts think Richard's story was just that, a story, an excuse. And strangely enough, it worked. People started admiring him. He had fans. He gained a twisted sort of popularity. We'll get to that later. But there were medical reports that showed Richard suffered 2 serious head injuries. The first one was when he was 2 years old. A heavy wooden dresser fell on his head, causing major brain damage. He had to undergo 2 surgeries. The second injury happened at age 6, and its effects lasted until he was at least 13. Doctors said those injuries damaged parts of his brain responsible for remorse, empathy, and impulse control. Basically, he grew up with a mind full of rage, hate, and evil. Still, not everyone buys the science. Some researchers think it wasn't just the head injuries that shaped Richard into a monster. It was the influence of one man, his cousin, Mike. And to understand how Mike changed Richard's life forever, you need to hear about the second murder Richard committed. It was May 28, 1984, in a small village near Los Angeles, California. That night, a 79-year-old woman named Jenny Vinco was sleeping peacefully in her home, with her bedroom window left open. Richard Ramirez slipped inside, looking for something to steal. He spent about half an hour quietly moving through the house, opening drawers, checking rooms, but didn't find anything worth taking. Then something snapped in him. In a dark moment of thought, he said to himself, "Why leave here with clean hands? Why not leave a mark for Satan?" He went back to the bedroom, took a pillow, pressed it over the old woman's face, and began stabbing her like a man possessed. In just 3 minutes, he stabbed her 186 times. From her blood, he drew a pentagram on the pillow and wrote, "Hail Satan," then added one more line, "Thank you, Mike." A twisted dedication to his cousin, the man he saw as his first mentor in this bloody path. So who the hell was Mike? And what did he do to have such an impact on Richard? Mike was an American soldier of Mexican descent. He had spent a long time in Vietnam, committing horrific crimes that were way beyond human decency. Murders, assaults, torture, arson, all of it documented in pictures and videos. When Mike returned to the U.S., Richard was just a 10-year-old boy. Every night, Mike would sit the little kid down, tell him war stories like they were fairy tales, showing him bloody photos and videos like they were trophies. But it didn't stop there. Mike trained him, taught him how to use a knife, skin an animal, kill without blinking, and it got worse. At just 10 years old, Richard started using drugs with Mike. Then one day, it happened. Right in front of Richard's eyes, Mike pulled out a gun and shot his own wife in the head. Her blood splattered all over the young boy's face. Mike turned to him, smiled, and said, "Now you're a real man. You've been baptized in human blood. Promise me you'll do the same someday." It was like a dark, twisted initiation. That moment made Richard a monster. Mike went to prison. Richard went to live with his sister, who just happened to be married to Roberto, another broken man drowning in addiction and evil. Roberto picked up right where Mike left off. Together, they shaped Richard from a troubled kid into a full-blown servant of Satan. Now let's talk about the next crime. March 27, 1985. That night, Richard was watching a house closely, waiting for the right moment. Inside lived a young woman named Maria Hernandez, 22 years old. He waited until she drove home from work and pulled into the garage. Then he crept up behind her, silently. As soon as she stepped out of the car, he pointed a gun at her and said in a cold, chilling voice, "Say it. Say, 'Hail Satan.'" He forced her to repeat several disturbing phrases, all praising the devil. Then he told her, "Now, I can offer my soul as a gift to Satan." He pulled the trigger, but by some miracle, Maria survived. She'd instinctively raised her hand to protect herself, and the bullet hit a thick metal bracelet she was wearing. It deflected. She dropped to the ground and played dead. Richard thought she was gone. Inside the house, Maria's roommate, Dale Okazaki, 34 years old, heard the noise and panicked. She ran and hid inside a kitchen cabinet, shaking in fear. Richard knew someone else was in the house. He searched, then calmly sat in the hallway just outside the kitchen, waiting. 10 minutes went by. Then, Dale slowly opened the cabinet door to peek out. Richard looked her straight in the eyes, smiled. Bingo! And shot her. No hesitation. But he didn't stop at murder. He used her blood to draw strange symbols and shapes on the floor. Then, as a final touch, he wrote beside the body, "Thanks, Roberto." A chilling tribute to his new partner in darkness. Richard stepped out of the house, and right in front of his eyes, something totally unexpected happened. Maria, the woman he thought he killed, was running down the street in full panic. He froze. She was alive? He panicked and tried chasing after her at first, but she was screaming at the top of her lungs, calling for help from the neighbors. That was it. He knew if he stuck around, he'd get caught. So he took off running, bolting into the trees, running like a maniac until he couldn't breathe. Eventually, he stumbled back out onto a street, and that's when he saw a car, driven by a young Japanese-American woman named Tsai Lian Yu. He forced her out of the car, threw her to the ground, and shot her straight in the head, just like Mike had taught him. Then he stole the car and drove off into the night. Later, Richard admitted that he wasn't even aware he was copying Mike's exact methods, a bullet to the head, like a loyal student mimicking his twisted mentor. But now, let's set Mike aside for a moment and ask something else. Why did Richard write "Thank you, Roberto" in Delene's blood? The answer is simple and terrifying. Roberto, his sister's husband, was the one who taught him how to sneak into houses and steal without leaving a trace. He used to take Richard to cemeteries to get high. And there, in the middle of that cold, eerie silence, he began teaching him satanic symbols and dark rituals. Roberto would say, "A graveyard is the quietest place on earth. Good spirits, bad spirits, they're all here. Learn to talk to them." But that's not all. While sitting in those cemeteries, they'd blast music associated with Satan worship. Those dark experiences, that poison he soaked in as a teen, shaped Richard into the monster he became. If it weren't for all the testimonies, reports, and international coverage, you'd think this story was pure fiction. But sadly, every single part of it is real. After the murders of Tsai Lian Yu and Delene Okazaki, Richard vanished for 2 full weeks. He spent that time sitting in a graveyard, alone. He later said that while meditating there, he heard a voice, a dark voice, telling him to kill again. But this time, the voice said, "Draw the satanic symbols directly on their bodies, not just the floors." So that's exactly what he did. He left the cemetery and headed to a wealthy neighborhood nearby, in Whittier, Los Angeles County. He picked a fancy-looking house, the home of Vincent Zazzara, 64 years old. And for the record, yes, all the names I mention are real. Some people have accused me of making this up, but I only share true, documented facts. Now back to that night. Richard entered the home and found Vincent asleep on the living room couch. Without saying a word, he stabbed him 46 times. Then he started searching the house, until he reached the bedroom, where Vincent's wife, Maxine Zazzara, 44, was lying in bed. He killed her too. And then began his sick ritual. He carved 21 satanic symbols into her body. Then he stayed inside the house for 3 straight hours, drawing symbols on the walls and floors using the victim's blood. When he was done, he walked out as calmly as he came in. The crime wasn't discovered until 2 days later. Now let's zoom out a bit and talk about how America was reacting to all this. By mid-1985, the number of confirmed crimes linked to Richard was under 20. But the panic he created was so intense, people started attributing over 150 crimes to him. He became a bloody trend. Every unsolved murder blamed on him. And worse, people across the country were starting to imitate his style. In June 1985, the New York Times published a headline, "When Will the Nightmare of the Night Stalker End?" That's where his nickname came from. The Night Stalker. Why? Because he'd stalk his victims at night, break into their homes out of nowhere, and kill without reason, no pattern, no logic. Didn't matter if the victim was old or young, male or female, black or white. He just wanted to kill. Only to kill. When they finally caught him and ran psychological tests, they found something chilling. He was obsessed with Satan. Obsessed to the point of madness. He had spent years studying satanic rituals, reading every book he could find. His body was covered in tattoos and carvings of satanic symbols. He claimed he didn't go to graveyards to hide. He went there to sit in peace with his dark lord, far away from people. It got to a point where his madness was no longer human. The first time he appeared publicly in court, he raised his hand, and right there on his palm, a massive satanic symbol, like he was pledging allegiance in front of the whole world. Before his capture, the U.S. government offered a $500,000 reward for information leading to his arrest. Campaigns flooded the streets with the slogan, "Protect the elderly." Because most of his victims were senior citizens, families all along the West Coast were sleeping together in the same room, afraid to be alone, especially the elderly. As for the police, they came up with a plan. They set up trap houses, empty homes with open windows, leaving one person inside to bait the Night Stalker. But the plan failed. Richard never showed up at any of those houses, not because he figured out the trap, but because by then he had found a better way in. He was sneaking into homes, through the sewer tunnels, this crime right here. It was the one that made him a legend, the kind of twisted fame Richard never even dreamed of. He broke into a house that, believe it or not, the police were actively watching. Yeah, they were watching the place. And still, he slipped right in, silent, invisible. Inside the house lived two elderly sisters, Mabel, 83 years old, and her older sister Florence, 85. Richard got in through a sewer grate, crawled up into the basement, then crept silently up to the bedrooms. There they were, the sisters, fast asleep. He moved toward Mabel first. Quietly, he placed a pillow over her face and pressed down until she stopped breathing. Then he turned to Florence. But this time he didn't suffocate her. He stabbed her. Not once. Not twice. 423 times. And when he was done, he dipped his fingers in her blood and wrote one thing on her pillow. With love, from the Night Stalker. Then he vanished, back through the basement, down into the sewers, and out into the woods. The bodies weren't found until 2 days later. And when the details of the crime hit the news, America exploded. How the hell did this guy pull off a murder under police surveillance? The public was furious. Some blamed the cops for being careless. Others whispered darker theories. Maybe the police were in on it. After that, Richard Ramirez disappeared for 2 whole months. Later, he said he spent that time hiding out in a cemetery, never speaking to a single living soul. When he came back with a mission, a new kind of horror. He broke into a random house, didn't kill anyone that night, but he sure scared the hell out of the people inside. He made them paint satanic symbols on the walls, forced them to chant strange, gibberish-like phrases, and then he left. Just like that. Later, he said it wasn't just a prank. He called it a vision, a kind of dark calling he received during his time in the cemetery. But the truth? Lie detector tests later revealed something very different. August 27th, 1985. Richard had his eye on a house. Inside lived a 68-year-old man, his wife Layla, 66, and their little granddaughter, who was barely 8 years old. Ramirez broke in quietly, headed straight for the little girl's room. He held a cloth to her face soaked in chemicals until she passed out. Then carried her to her grandparents' room. He stood there, knife in hand, placed the blade on the child's neck, and said, "Do everything I say, or I'll kill her right in front of you." The grandparents were shaking, sobbing, terrified. They nodded. They obeyed. He handed them a piece of paper, covered in strange phrases and symbols, told them to write every single word on the walls and mirrors, in red, and they did. They painted circles and upside-down crosses, crying as they worked, while Richard stood there laughing like a maniac. And then he left. Didn't hurt the girl, didn't kill anyone. But before he walked out, he made them swear to Satan himself, that they wouldn't tell the cops what he looked like. Then he disappeared again. Meanwhile, Richard was following the media every single day. He loved seeing his name in the headlines. He got off on it. He once said, "If I could guarantee I'd stay on the front page forever, I'd kill someone even worse every single day." But eventually, the coverage slowed down, and that made him angry. He called the press traitors for not keeping him in the spotlight. Now, Richard committed many crimes. Some he admitted to. Some are still unsolved to this day. But the one that finally brought him down? That came next. August 24th, 1985. He stole a brand new car, hit the road, looking for his next victim. What I didn't tell you before is that Richard had a thing for cars. He was obsessed. When he wasn't in cemeteries, he was flying down the freeway like a demon, speeding from city to city like a hungry predator. That day, he parked near the back door of a quiet home. Inside lived a man named Bill Carnes, 29 years old. Ramirez pushed the door open and stepped inside. As soon as he saw Bill, he shot him. 3 bullets, point blank, dead on the spot. Then he turned to Bill's fiancée, Carol, just 27. He beat her hard, smashed her in the head until she collapsed. He thought she was dead, so he relaxed, started laughing, singing to himself, and scribbling his symbols on the walls. When he was satisfied, he walked out of the house, confident, pleased. No idea Carol was still alive. The moment he was gone, she dragged herself to the phone and called the police. Would you like me to now pick up from the aftermath? How the manhunt exploded after Carol's call? But what happened next was something no one saw coming. As Richard walked away from Bill's house, a sharp 17-year-old named James Romero spotted him. Something felt off. The way Richard moved, the way he looked, it didn't sit right with James. So he did something brilliant. He memorized the license plate of Richard's car and wrote it down. Not even 3 minutes later, Carol, beaten, bloodied, barely standing, stumbled out into the street, screaming, "That was the Night Stalker!" James didn't waste a second. He grabbed a phone and called the cops, gave them the plate number he'd written down. The LAPD kicked into high gear. Squad cars hit the streets, and just 6 hours later, they found the car, abandoned on the outskirts of Los Angeles. The forensics team swarmed the vehicle. They dusted it inside and out, and struck gold. Fingerprints. 3 days later, the lab confirmed a match. The prints belonged to Richard Ramirez, a guy with a rap sheet stretching back to when he was 19. Attempted murder, drug charges, and more. Now they had a name, a face. The chief of police held a press conference that aired everywhere, held up Richard's photo and declared, "Now the world knows who the Night Stalker is. It's only a matter of time before we bring him down." But here's the twist. Richard was out of town. He'd taken a bus from LA to Arizona to visit his brother. And he had no idea his face was now plastered on every screen in California. Even crazier? His brother was a hardcore anti-American, only watched Mexican channels. He hadn't seen anything about the manhunt. Richard spent 5 whole days there, relaxing, clueless. Then he headed back to LA, and the moment he stepped off the bus, he knew something felt wrong. August 31st, 1985. Morning. Richard was walking down the street like any normal guy, stopped at a crosswalk, waiting for the light to change. And then, an old woman next to him screamed, "It's him! It's the Night Stalker!" Heads turned, people stared, and then chaos. The whole street erupted. Folks started shouting, chasing after him. Richard bolted, running full speed through traffic, tried to jack a car, failed, kept running, desperate like a hunted animal. A group of brave young guys caught up to him, cornered him in a dead-end street. There they beat him, hard. He blacked out. When he came to, he was in a hospital bed, surrounded by a wall of cops. The trial? It wasn't fast. It took 3 full years before it even began. He was under heavy investigation, questioned by every agency you could name. And when the trial finally started, it was broadcast live on national television. The moment Richard walked in, he lifted his hand, showing off a pentagram tattoo, and shouted, "Hail Satan!" He was calm, cold, no emotion, no regrets. Charge after charge was read out loud. He didn't deny a single one, but then things took an even darker turn. He threatened to kill one of the jurors. Rumors spread that he planned to sneak a gun into court, so they installed metal detectors at every entrance. Then one day, a juror didn't show up. When the authorities checked on her, they found her murdered in her home. California was shocked. People began whispering that Richard had powers, that he was some kind of dark sorcerer, a servant of Satan himself, especially since just days before, he'd publicly threatened them all. But in the end, the truth came out. She'd been killed by her own husband. He found out she was cheating, murdered her in a rage, then took his own life, leaving behind a confession. Still, the myth of Richard grew. He became a cult icon. His fan base exploded in the most disturbing way. Over 16,000 fan letters a week poured into his prison cell. Women, young and old, wrote love notes. Some even visited him, kissed him through the glass. His words in court became graffiti slogans on LA's streets. And the weirdest part? A lawyer, 42 years old, filed an official request to marry him. The court delayed the wedding until after sentencing. But sure enough, once Richard was sentenced to death, they got married. She became his wife, was allowed to visit him twice a week. But 2 months in, he dumped her and married a journalist who was much younger, a convicted killer, on death row. and women were lining up for him. While good guys on the outside, they couldn't even get a text back. Finally, in 2013, Richard Ramirez died at a hospital in LA after battling lymphoma for 3 years. His last words? "I feel no remorse. See you in Disneyland. I'll be back. I'm an eternal spirit and Satan's loyal servant." And that's the end of today's story. If this one had you hooked, you need to check out the story of the guard who stole half a ton of cash without hesitation, and the wild case of the Lloyd's bank robbery, which accidentally exposed royal scandals. Both are insane and totally worth your time. See you in the next video.